in Guyana, the single person who has the longest history with the Guyana Basin has been in that industry for a long time. He's also head of the Guyana Geology and Mines Commission. He will deliver the first presentation today on the Guyana Basin. Ladies and gentlemen, one of our esteemed citizens and head of the Guyana Geology and Mines, could you please welcome Mr. Newell Dennison to speak on the Guyana Basin.
All courtesies established. I am very pleased this morning to share with you some thoughts and perspectives picked up along the way about Guyana's petroleum exploration domains. A bit of what I present may even be extended to Liza and Payara, but those areas are to be addressed by ESSO in their own expert manner. And since the generation of interest has been focused there, it has been progressing quite deliberately in all the current conversations. And it is also currently an area firmly assigned. Therefore, please permit me to direct some attention to those parts of Guyana's exploration estate which still have to emerge. In other words, I ain't talking about Lisa, I ain't talking about Payaro. I cannot avoid mentioning that for some years it has been the vision of the Petroleum Division, Guyana Geology and Mines Commission, to thrust Guyana into the realm of petroleum production and associated industries. I dare say, notwithstanding the discoveries, commercial successes, anticipated transformative agendas, economically, socially, and otherwise, at this time, I remain in the prior mode of preparing the platform for continued pointed exploration, as for example, in the shelfal areas and in the Takatu Basin, where observed cycles of time for a campaign of drilling is approximately 10 years. I find it important to emphasize during this time of high enthusiasm that it would be strategic to have our various domains productive, as diversity is survival in a very complex and fickle industry. So please forgive me that while the buzz is about oil refineries and such, the next set of exploration drilling is in areas that in this brief account should warrant support for intense and a hard look going forward. I can't emphasize more the issue indeed of getting us from the point where we're in a promotion mode to actually getting the drill bit into the ground. And from the little experience that I've had in treating with Guyana, with all the revealing issues that our Prime Minister and Vice President would have referred to, 10 years is a long time. So I've had the good opportunity to have witnessed in the career that I've embarked in approximately 3 episodes of campaigns. And I suppose, God sparing, there might still be one left on the shelf again before my exit. So there, on this Guyana Oil and Gas Association Inc. Oil and Gas Conference, my intention is to present to you a brief account of features typical of the offshore Guyana and Takatu Basin. This slide, usually I use shades of green, but Guyana is hot right now, hence the colors. I hope it doesn't offend the eyes. Indicates where Guyana Basin is, and there can be a division into a coastal onshore basin fringe and the offshore area, which together constitute all of Guyana's maritime area. And I would want to say that in all the time that I've been treating with contracts and dealing with the administration of the petroleum estate, as far as I'm aware, we have never had any intention to represent areas outside of where we understand our estate to be for Guyana's exploitation. So I'm very confident that the areas that we have assigned for petroleum exploration in particular are within Guyana's legal economic zone. There can be a division into coastal onshore basin fringe and the offshore area, which together constitutes all of Guyana's maritime estate. The basin fringe essentially corresponds to the low coastal plain, a geographic region of Guyana. The Takatu Basin, circled in green, in south-central Guyana, essentially separates the geology of North Guyana from south of Guyana. The metallurgy of the north of Guyana is better explored and documented than that of the south of Guyana. And the north is known for mineral-rich corridors associated with the Greenstone Belt, where gold mining has been the economic pillar over the past 5+ years. It is generally accepted that rifting in the Jurassic period has, through the eventual opening of the North Atlantic and beyond, separated where Guyana is in South America from its opposite on the west coast of Africa. And as this slide attempts to depict, it is the sequence of events that has given rise to the basinal areas of Guyana and the trend that includes Suriname and French Guyana. Within these basinal areas, thick depositional sequences in a marine environment were laid down during the Jurassic and early Cretaceous. Subsequently, this deposition continued on, with a net result to the present. Deposition was neither constant nor systematic, as flexing of the continental plates due to structural accommodation was typical. One such flexure, about 200 million years ago, along the northern edge of South America, along with transgressive and regressive events, have provided Guyana with the rich white sand series and the low coastal plain below sea level at the moment. Due to the divergent nature of the Atlantic opening, the coasts of South America and West Africa are generally referred to as passive margins. This slide depicts the approximate delineation of the Guyana-Suriname Basin. In the south, what is sometimes described as a continental outlier, the Demerara Plateau, marks the extremity. The Demerara Plateau contributes significantly to the distribution of sediments in the basin. To the north, an anticlinal feature, the Pomeroon Arch, forms the limit in that direction, essentially separating the Guyana-Suriname Basin from what takes place in the Orinoco and beyond in Venezuela. During the Jurassic to Cretaceous, sedimentation was preserved in the deep basinal areas. Schematics have been used here to provide a better appreciation for a typical passive margin setting. Canyon features are incised especially during regressive cycles and form the primary conduits for sediments to reach the basinal areas. The reticulation of Guyana, along with the retreat of the highlands well back to the hinterlands, are indicative of the work done to have rich supplies of clastics into the basin. While down to the basin faulting would have provided some structural elements in the passive margin environment, facies development are just as critical to recognize in prospect identification and exploration modeling. This schematic also points to carbonate facies at paleoshelf edges. The stratigraphy of the basin is depicted in this slide. The basement of igneous formations from the Jurassic breakup is sometimes thought to hide some potential for petroleum exploration, as metasediments are postulated to be preserved. In the Takatu Basin, where seismic basement is the volcanics associated with the Mesozoic to Jurassic basin formations, Guyana Hunt Oil Company drilled into the volcanics with no evidence of such preserved section. The Stabroek Formation consists of basal sands, and these are potentially good reservoir materials. The Potoko Formation is described as Albion stage shelf carbonates. Their massive development versus reef-void forms are thought to reduce their role in prospect identification, where drake features would be evident. However, testing by Total has encountered diagenesis, which crippled porosity, confirming that it could otherwise be a reliable seal. It is my view that the Potoko warrants 3D seismic work that could reveal where porosity might have been preserved improving its potential as a reservoir formation in certain places. The Kanji Formation is a world-class source rock and an anoxic shale basin-wide with total organic carbon ranging to 4% plus within the shelfal areas. The Kanji Formation is a world-class source rock and an anoxic shale basin-wide with total organic carbon ranging to 4% plus within the shelfal areas, and it probably significantly higher beyond approximately 20% beyond the shelf break. The Kanji Formation is also known as the La Luna Shales within the Latin America and is a mature source rock in the basin. The New Amsterdam Formation is predominantly sand-rich in the shelf, but with intervals of clays and carbonates towards the paleoshelf edge. The New Amsterdam Formation is to be proved as another source rock within the basin, but until that time, it remains only potentially so. The overlying Georgetown, then Pomeroon, then Corentyne formations are sand-rich in the shelfward direction, but become more clay-rich with carbonate inclusions distally. I have selected the schematics here to provide a picture of what the structure and morphology of the Guyana Basin could be. It is understanding structure and morphology that allows a model to be constructed against which prospects and targets for petroleum exploration could be tested. In these schemes, the presence of structure is subtle and sparse. Down to the basin fault blocks, antithetic fault development, and growth faults are always good to look for. There are several areas within the basin where paleofacies distribution can be targeted, for example, where stratigraphic pinchouts occur, slumps and fan complexes off the shelf edge occur, and where there are turbidite flows. Canyons and canyon fill, levees and levee channels are all typical for exploration targets. The seismic strike section was provided to add some context to the reality of the Guyana Basin. That interconnectivity between intervals is in a vertical sense is not always immediately obvious, making charge to reservoir a challenge. It is therefore very important to work within the sequences for such opportunities to be identified. On the one hand, it could be a good thing once petroleum once trapped should be preserved. On the other hand, without migration, the many reservoir options in the basin remain uncharged. Fairways within the tertiary, without success, have been the convention so far in the shelfal areas. The late Cretaceous, perhaps, should be a better test to consider going forward. All the interpretations done and mentioned would be useless if there is not an understanding of the timing of the deposition, maturing and expulsion of petroleum, which is then available to migrate and be captured within the structures or traps mentioned before. It is a combination of these elements, reservoirs, seals, source, maturation, trap, that make an active or working petroleum system. The Guyana Basin, until Liza, was confirmed to have a working petroleum system by virtue of the production in the Tambarejo and Saramacca fields in Suriname, as well as geoscientific evidence or encounters in drilled wells, for example, as in the Abari 1. The depiction of this slide suggests from vitrinite reflectance, which is a tool used for assessing source maturity, that the envelope of influence over time of the basin-wide source rocks. It proposes that a mature and attractive source is currently in place and situated approximately the central axial locus of the Guyana-Suriname Basin, straddling the shelfal and somewhat distal locations to the shelf. Having analyzed this, the rocks in arriving at drilling decision do not disappear. While reservoir material is abundant and well distributed within the basin, and that appears to be sufficient mature, and there appears to be sufficient mature active source rock, the risk of migration paths, seal and timing remains significant. It is my view that the application of new 2D seismic, and definitely 3D seismic, could mitigate significantly the risks mentioned. This speaks more directly to what was mentioned earlier, making a case for ample reservoir within the basin. For example, the Stabroek and Georgetown formations, potential seals from the Pomeroon and Patoka formation, where its porosity has been compromised through diagenesis, may also be applicable. The illustrations here speak to potential play types. Some have been targeted but not achieved. For example, the Burbis Canyon, for me, warrants the adventurous spirit and the deep pocket. This project actually recovered petroleum in material overlying the target before the drilling had to be stopped. A Jaguar revisit is at the top of my wish list. A shift to the late Cretaceous could be the modification in conventional thinking that would revive the shelfal areas. The Cenomanian Teuteronian Eagle Deep is another on the wish list for the drill bit. Perhaps more easily accessible, but somewhat riskier due to migration issues within the shelf, are some relatively shallow water prospects targeting mounded features to the west of the basin, referred to here as the Pomeroon prospects. These are in the location of a natural basement high where the winey arching is interpreted. Turbidites were at the time very fashionable. These are inferred turbidites. There are inferred turbidites, along the shelf break, which holds some potential if the value of the incomplete test by the Barry number 1 well could be an indicator. The truth is that the Guyana Basin has had a rich exploration history from some of the most reputable players of the day: Shell, Conoco, Demonex, Total, Mobil, among others. The environment for investment in Guyana versus other locations may not have been ripe at that time for Guyana. I believe there has been a revival of interest since Lisa that will bring a revisit to open shelfal areas and bolder investment decisions by those companies that have been here during the lean times on the shelf, such as CGX, Repsol et al. Ladies and gentlemen, what this slide represents is a glimpse of near misses for better outcomes to be realized. The basin has been abandoned on the Brazilian side, but Guyana finds it sufficiently endowed with attributes to continue its promotion. More so for the potential a commercial discovery in that area would have for an energy-starved northern Brazil and southern Guyana, notwithstanding rural electrification projects using alternative energy sources. 2 wells in the 1980s by Home Oil of Canada, of which their Carnamba number 1 was a discovery. 1 well by Guyana Hunt Oil Company in the 1990s, the Torrent Sink, and an offset to the Carnamba number 1 well called the Apateri K2 by Takatu Oil and Gas in 2010 did not have the anticipated outcomes. The genesis of the Takatu Basin is generally accepted to be the rifting due to the divergent tectonic plate movements in late Triassic to early Jurassic. It is looked upon as a failed arm of a trijunction, so fate actually determined that Rupununi in all its glory would remain with Guyana, rather than what would have been an interesting distribution of land mass. Perhaps fewer famines outside of the equatorial area where the divergent margin would have been. The Takatu Basin is characterized as a lacustrine intractonic basin. The stratigraphy has been ascertained and consists of the Apateri basalts, it may actually be an andesite, but I'm not going to go there, of early Triassic to Jurassic age. This is overlain by the Manari Formation, which is the recognized source rock in the basin. It is a non-marine shale. The Parara Formation overlies the Manari Formation, and it is a mid-Jurassic salt and gray shale. which is pervasive in the basin, representing arid conditions at that time. The Takatu Formation is the Middle to Jurassic, Early Cretaceous, non-marine clastic. The Tertiary and later nappy laterite formation are not typically referred to, and is probably due to its uneven distribution and preservation within the basin. The schematics shown provide a plan view and cross-section of the basin. The basin is segmented into several depot centers, formed from the main structural elements within the basin, being the north and south boundary faults, and down to the basin faulted sections. There is an axis dividing the basin east and west, referred to as the Savannah Arch. This basin was a hot basin, and this rendered the Manari Shale overmature. There has been hydrothermal activity throughout the basin, also affecting the maturity of source rock and potential source formations, such as shaly intervals within the Perara Formation and the Takatu Formation. The basin is structurally complex, and while it has a fair coverage of 2D seismic and limited gravity, the basin will no doubt require additional technical tools, including 3D seismic. That a working petroleum system is in place has been established with the Karnambo No. 1 discovery. The Manari Formation is a recognized source, but the Perara Formation and Takatu Formation, although are speculated as potential candidates, which are still to be proved. Reservoir rocks are readily provided from the bordering highlands, and these are also represented as fans and redistributed elements typical of riverine morphology. Fracture sets have been analyzed in the Apatary volcanics, which have been ascertained as a host for petroleum charge due to juxtapositioning of the source against it in the Karnambo discovery. Seas are expected to be the Manari shales and the intervals of shales in the Takatu Formation, as well as the salts of the Perara Formation. Play types are still relevant, such as normal faulting off the boundary faults, which juxtaposes reservoir and source rock, and the Savannah Arch, creating a natural high for petroleum migration and its capture in structural closures from internal faulting sets. Some of the identified prospects within the basin are still to be tested, such as a pre-salt Jurassic horse along the southern portion of the Savannah Arch, referred to as the Kanuku Prospect. In my prior conversation, I have essentially addressed the exploration history, which brings me to the end of my pitch for the Takatu Basin. But let me leave you with this. The basin is rich with structure. It has abundant infill from prime sediment sources, making reservoir readily available. Seas are distributed throughout the lithological section. Source and petroleum systems are established with high quality crude as an incentive. This is the current configuration of the tenure status in the Guyana Basin. Dark grays are available. Yellows are assigned as marked. The major exploration work is being done by Esso et al. Esso is the operator now by virtue of commercial arrangements with Ratio Oil in the Kaieteur block, with Atlantic Oil and Gas in the Kanji block, and of course their own Stabroek block, where they are side by side preparing for development and production. Tullow is the operator for the Oreo block with Echo Atlantic, and they are preparing for some seismic work later this year. Repsol has their next set of seismic on Kanuku block coming June, as is CGX, the presence of whom at this conference is reassuring that their once active role will in time return. Our coastal onshore projects have been struggling, but we must recognize that the international situation for the sector is still subdued and tentative. I'm pleased to indicate, however, that exploration interest in Guyana remains high. The country continues to attract some of the most recognized players, and I'm gently trying to persuade them to revisit our shelf and Takatu basins. Finally, the conversations about Guyana's petroleum industry future is now beginning. I fervently hope that we are able to identify what is strategic and practical. And even as we try to ensure that we cater for the generations to come, we must remember that we must always leave enough room for them to make their own decisions that will be in an environment and space radically different than what we confront today. This is the reference set. And I thank you very much for your attention.
Emma is a licensed geology she got her degree in the University of Barcelona, finished her MSc in Petroleum Geoscience at the Harriet Watt University in Edinburgh. She worked together with a team of more than 80 geoscientists building a global geological model sustained by a property sequence, stratigraphic, and geodynamic framework. In 2014, when NetFX was acquired by Landmark, she became a representative of their exploration technologies, exploration insights inside industry of the American continent. Please welcome Emma from Halliburton, and her topic is the late Cretaceous deep water plays in West Africa and implications along the South American conjugate. Emma?
Hello, good morning everyone. My name is Emma, and today I will demonstrate a methodology to screen out from a very large area which are the areas of focus of interest of further exploration. So first of all, I would like to overview a little bit the oil and gas industry and the exploration offshore in the past 10 years. On the screen I'm showing a graph where we see the discovered volumes of hydrocarbons from 2005 to 2015. Split by continent. As we can see in the screen, there's been a very important decrease on the amount of discovered volumes in the past years. However, in this second graph, I'm showing the number of discoveries onshore, near shore, and offshore. And as we can see, although the number of discoveries is smaller offshore, the work is much more rewarding. The volumes discovered are bigger when we do an offshore discovery. So this led us to think, are we losing creativity in the water exploration, or are we lacking of an effective methodology of screening out which are the areas for further exploration? The data that I will use for my screening workflow is called the Exploration Insights Earth Model, and it's a global database that we have built together with a team of more than 80 geoscientists that have put together global information from the public domain, have sequenced it through a sequence stratigraphic and geodynamic framework, and have created a 2D and 3D geological model of the whole globe for the past 600 million years. My area of interest to start with is going to be West Africa. Then we will look how to mirror this workflow here in Guyana. West Africa, this area of interest extends more than 2 million square kilometers, and we will focus on what we call the late Cretaceous deep marine water clastic plays, which are the reservoirs that have late Cretaceous age and have plastic lithology. There are several discoveries throughout the West African coast that correspond to these reservoirs and are charged by the Cenomanian-Turonian boundary source rocks that my colleague was talking about before. We found the first discovery that was discovered in West Africa was the Jubilee field, offshore Ghana in 2007, and from there we had several satellite discoveries of the same age. However, we do believe that this place is very underexplored, both in the West African margin and the South American margin as well. So for today's presentation, we will follow on a play that is charged by this Cenomanian-Turonian source rock. What we see in the screen is a geological timescale, and we show the age of the events that are relevant for our play screening. The reservoirs that we will use are late Cretaceous reservoirs, being the marine sandstones in several deposited throughout sea level lows during several times of the late Cretaceous. These reservoirs are self-sealed by deep marine shales from the same age, and we will use two regional depth models that we have created in-house using decision space to screen out the depth of the position of the source and the reservoirs. Lastly, something very important to be considered is that there is diapirism affecting some of the areas in the West African margin. The workflow I will use for today's screening is first understand the presence and the effectiveness of my reservoir as well as the source rock, and then come out with some windows of technical interest where we would like to have further exploration in the future. So let's talk about the first challenge that we face when exploring such big scales. The first challenge that we will face is the position of these deep marine sands. You can see in the screen what we call a gross depositional environment map. This map shows us the location or the deposition of the fascias in the geological past. This represents the sea level low globally, and hence we have deposition of clastics throughout the basin. In yellow, we have represented the position of deep marine sandstones. So hence, for this screening workflow, we will take all the late Cretaceous deep marine sandstones and stack them together in a single map. This will represent an area of high possibility of having encounterment of reservoir fascias. So from here, we will paint them in green, which means that we have possibility of having presence of reservoir fascias. From our oil and gas field map, we have queried out just the oil and gas fields that have this H reservoir, and this allows us drawing some higher confidence polygons where we have proven presence of these deep marine sandstones. And from here, we can draw some buffers in yellow, orange, and red that create a traffic light map of success. So green areas are areas where we have a lot of possibility of having these deep marine sandstone have deposits in the geological past, and red areas where it is like they are likely to be absent. Another feature to take into account, as I mentioned before, is the presence of salt. We will query out the areas that are interfered by salt due to diapirism, because this diapirism has break into the presence of the deep marine sandstones, and hence they are likely to be absent. So far, we have understood which is the paleo distribution of deep marine plastics during the late Cretaceous throughout the whole margin of West Africa. However, now we want to understand the effectiveness of this reservoir. We have a global database that has been sequenced by frequent stratigraphy, and this allows us just to take the data from the late Cretaceous and plot it in a permeability to porosity plot. In the graph, we see all the West Africa data that we have that talks about reservoir quality of these reservoir fascias and define depth thresholds that will allow us to understand where the fascias are too deep to have help the permeability to store hydrocarbons, so then we won't keep exploring these areas. And other areas we may have very shallow reservoirs, and hence we have enough permeability to store hydrocarbons. We have used a regional depth grid to understand the depth of the late Cretaceous fascias around West Africa. And if we translate our cutoffs into depth, we can generate again another depth map that will show us the depth of the late Cretaceous sediments throughout the whole margin. So as you can see a very big red spot in front of the Niger Delta, and this represents the younger sediments that are deposited in this area. So because we have very thick sediments on the top, the reservoir is likely to have been buried deep enough that it doesn't help the reservoir effectiveness. And hence, the permeability is likely to be very low, and we have less possibility to have reservoir quality. So now, if we overlay both maps, we have to overlay the reservoir presence likeliness map with the reservoir's effective likeliness map. We can have a combined map of reservoir salinity. So in a matter of 10 minutes, thanks to having all our data organized in a scientifically accurate manner, we can understand at a regional scale where do we have likeliness to have present and effective reservoir for the late Cretaceous deep marine sandstones. Let's do the same for the source rock. As my colleague said in the previous presentation, we are dealing with first world-class source rock, and this was deposited throughout the Cenomanian-Turonian boundary. In the bottom left of the screen, you see a paleospastic map where we have reconstructed in the geological past the position of the continents. And there was a feature in the middle of the South Atlantic called the Walvis Range that isolated the northern part of the South Atlantic. leading to anoxia conditions throughout the whole West African and north of the South American continent. These anoxic conditions led into the deposition of a lot of organic enriched sediments, and hence we have preserved organic enriched sediments that have the potential to generate hydrocarbons. So if we now reconstruct this reconstructed map back to the present day and we plot it in West Africa, we see that we have drawn a grid polygon throughout the whole West African margin, or nearly throughout the whole margin, which means that we have likeliness to have the presence of these organic marine sediments throughout the whole margin. Moreover, from our stratigraphy and our petroleum systems database, we can see that we have confirmations of this source work being proven in several points of the margin. If we now look at our geochemistry database, we have plotted for this age of source rock, Cenomanian-Turonian boundary, all the West African Tmax versus hydrocarbon index data. And we can see that we have several TOC contents ranging up to 10.8% throughout the whole margin. And also we have difference. For example, Namibia data has lower TOC than other data because it's closer to the non-anoxic area in the southern of the South Atlantic. Also, some of the data is plotted within the oil window, and hence it's looking promising throughout the whole region. The next step will be to use the benchmark reflectance data. This is an organic component inside the organic enriched facies that allow us determining if the source rock is mature enough to generate oil or gas. And we can plot it regionally as well against depth. Again, by using another regional depth frame that we have created for the whole Africa, representing the present day depth of the Cenomanian-Turonian boundary, we can define depth thresholds of maturity for our source rocks and generate a map of presence of mature enough hydrocarbons throughout West Africa. So from here, knowing that the source rock is present nearly everywhere in the margin and that we have some distinctive places where it's mature enough to generate hydrocarbons, we can go ahead and create our traffic map light again. We will consider a potentially successful charge area where we have present Cenomanian-Turonian boundary organic enriched source rocks that have been put in the oil and gas window. And we will consider a regional 50 kilometers buffer of potential migration around this source rock. From there, we can as well select the place or the fields that have been charged by this Cenomanian-Turonian source rock and generate some buffer of high confidence where our play is proven in terms of source rock. And lastly, we can generate another buffer of 75-100 kilometers where this source rock is less and less likely to be present. This is a simplified map of presence and quality of our source rock. It's what we call a combined charge certainty map, and it could be more refined by using structural data and combining with the regional structures. So now, so far, we have understood the presence and the effectiveness of the reservoir, as well as the presence and the effectiveness of the charge in our system in West Africa. We will now go ahead and hydrate areas for future exploration. So if we combine both maps that consider or account for presence and effectiveness of both reservoir and charge, we can create a combined map of effectiveness of reservoir and charge for a specific place. Another cutoff that we can apply and that we have applied in here is a technical cutoff, and several technical cutoffs will be applied depending on who is the explorer. So in our case, we consider that a depth of more than 3 kilometers wouldn't be interesting to explore due to the technical challenge, and we will as well cut off any area that is under 3 kilometers water depth. So, at this point, I have narrowed down an area of more than 2 million square kilometers to just 175,000 square kilometers, which represents the 8% of the initial area. And if we focus just on the equatorial margin in West Africa, in this map I am showing the polygons that I put in green, so the polygons where we have an effective and present reservoir and charge. And I have colored in darker colors which countries have a broader area for future exploration. So we can see, for example, in Equatorial Guinea, we have a lot of potential for future exploration in this particular play. Which would be the next steps? The next steps would be, for example, evaluating individual reservoir intervals instead of getting the whole Lake Cretaceous reservoirs, and compare different basins throughout the margin to see which ones have more and less potentials. And that's what I would like to do next, very briefly. I will like to jump into Guyana and see which are the geological characteristics that make the Guyana-Suriname basin such an interesting basin. So on the screen you see a paleospastic map again. You see the continents reconstructed in the geological past, and we have a global paleo-digital elevation model that allows us predicting the position of the deep marine fascias in the geological past. As you can see, we have drawn in yellow a lot of deep marine sandstones throughout offshore West Africa, but we have also drawn them in the South American conjugate. Therefore, this plate that I have been screening, it's also present in this side of the Atlantic. Let's talk a little bit about the exploration history in this margin. The first reported oil seeps were in the 19th century. We have been reporting oil seeps throughout the shoreline many years ago. However, the first fields were drilled in Suriname, and these are targeting younger stratigraphy, Paleocene sands. So hence it led us to think that there is migration from the deep basin up to the shallower parts. In 1981, and correct me if I'm wrong, there was the Zaidos 1 discovery, which was very promising, and then the Zaidos 2 was drilled, which was a little bit less promising. And we understand that the Zaidos 2 was less promising because of its connectivity with the shallower parts of the basin, and hence allowing migration of the hydrocarbons to the shallower parts of the basin. Therefore, we understand that the connectivity of the sandstones between the deep marine sandstone, between the shallow and the deep parts of the basin, is a key feature that we want to screen out at a regional scale. And we want to understand which are the potential sandstones that are more disconnected to the shoreline. Let's talk now about the source rock. As we mentioned before, we are dealing with a first world-class source rock that is present throughout the whole margin. We have represented this organic enrichment in green in our cross-depositional environment map for the Cenomanian-Turonian boundary. We have TOCs up to 38% with an average of 6 to 8%, and we are dealing with a type 2 kerogen. If we open up some of the wells that we have offshore Guyana that we have taken from public domain, we can identify very high gamma ray signatures that has led us to the conclusion that we can have up to 17 million years of upwelling towards the region, which means that we have a lot of nutrients productivity in this part of the geological time, and hence we can have an enhancement of the TOC content in the area. Let's talk a little bit about uplift. I have here some appetite fission track data from the public domain as well, and as we can see in both ends of our geological margin, we have uplift in the same geological times. One can see that during the late Cretaceous time, we had both uplift of the hinterland in the Rurarmi uplift and the Borborema uplift, which means that our lodestones or our sandstone deposits are enhanced by tectonics. Hence, at this time, not only we have proneness of deposition on sandstone, but also we had incision in the shelf and deposition of even more sediments due to the uplift of the hinterland. If we now open up those two wells that are parallel to the paleo shoreline, we can see that even if they are very close well, in one of the wells we have missing more than 900 meters stratigraphy, and in the other one we have very thick stratigraphy for these late Cretaceous times, which represents an incised valley. That is what we want to be targeting regionally, and that is what gives such a special potential on this basin. And the last feature that we want to consider is the Marara High, which allowed at that geological time in the late Cretaceous ponding against a paleo high deep in the basin, and hence we can have multiple pay rewards when we explore this basin. As I mentioned at the beginning of the Guyana focus part of the presentation, we are seeking for the marine fans that are disconnected from the shoreline. And there are several geological mechanisms that allow disconnection from the deep marine sands of the shoreline. What we see on the screen is a chronostratigraphic chart. In the vertical scale, we have geological time, and in the left of the screen, we have onshore Guyana, and if we go towards the offshore. As we can see, throughout the late Cretaceous, we had a very, very rapid flood of the sea towards the inside of Guyana, followed by a very, very rapid sea level low. So this progression and transgression of the fascias in a very fast manner allowed overstepping of the fascias towards the offshore, and hence disconnection of the deep marine sediments from the shoreline. Therefore, Guyana, as conclusions, is special because of 4 geological characteristics. As I mentioned, we have 17 million years of upwelling, which can lead to a higher quality source rock. We have deposition of late Cretaceous deep marine sandstones enhanced by tectonic, which means that there is more shelf incision and probably thicker sediment potential. We have ponding against the Demerara High, which can lead into multiple pay rewards. And lastly, we have at the same age of the deposition of the late Cretaceous deep marine plastics, we had as well eustatic sea level changes, which led to the isolation, probably, of these deep marine sandstone bodies on the offshore. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope I could overview the potential of Guyana geologically, how it compares to West Africa, and I would like you to make sure that everyone understands that this is possible thanks to having a very well scientifically accurate organized database, and without having a geological second stratigraphic and geodynamic framework, this rapid and accurate workflow wouldn't be possible. Thank you very much.
Prior to coming to Tech, Mr. Mandel was Chief Commercial Officer and Senior Vice President for WellTech UK, Europe, Russia, CIS from October 2010 to August 2015. Prior to leaving Schlumberger, Mr. Mandel was Global Vice President of the Simultaneous Services 2009 to 2010, responsible for managing global business and technology development, simultation, hydraulic fracturing services, and acidizing services. Mr. Mandel will be presenting. His subject is a game-changer technology in offshore logistics. Ladies and gents, please welcome Mr. Lars Mandel.
Thanks, Bobby. Sure. And distinguished members of GOGA for really setting up what I think is a world-class event here for Guyana and the oil and gas industry. Appreciate the opportunity to present and to share with you some, let's say, more disruptive technological considerations for how the industry may consider evolving in terms of support infrastructure and some of the requirements going forward for the industry. I'd like to really especially thank the GOGA team for what they've been able to do in a very short space of time. Since commencement in January of this year to now, a lot has been achieved. But I remember back in October at the launch, or the end of October, the 28th of October, in fact, when things kicked off here in the Marriott, that the considerations about the impact of GOGA and how it will align the various stakeholders, local, international, regional, and get things going in terms of raising the awareness within Guyana and beyond of what the potential lies ahead for the industry here. What I can say is in the coming years, I believe we'll look back at 2017 as being a defining year for the industry. And I think the statement here behind me on the transformative impact that will happen to Guyana as a result of the development of this very exciting new prospect and industry in Guyana will certainly be defined as a point of inflection in Guyana's development. Today I'll be presenting a novel concept. It's a game-changer technology and offshore logistics, and one of the biggest challenges that a new country with limited infrastructure faces embarking on a large project like this is how do you set things up for success and do things in the right way from the outset. A little bit on the agenda, a little abstract, some of the challenges, some of the key considerations, and of course the solution, and something concluding solution considerations and specifications. I'll skip a few of these introductions, but just to give you a little perspective on the Liza development. It lies offshore, ultra-deep water. Really, as I think we all recognize from the discussions this morning, a defining project for Guyana. Today, and this presentation is a little bit around logistics. You know, the Liza project development, phase 1, lies about 120 nautical miles offshore, around just under 200 kilometers offshore Guyana. Majority of the logistics today is supported out of Trinidad. That's simply been the fact of getting things going and starting with Trinidad's extensive experience in the oil and gas industry, being relied upon for delivering logistics, and of course having the capacity and the capability to support an exploration program. Of course, now we're moving from the exploration phase into the development phase, and as one can expect, you know, Guyana's development and participation in the industry is now on the agenda. Running logistics out of Trinidad, of course, versus Guyana, is a 2- to 3-fold time and cost and risk consideration when you look at it from that perspective. There are many disruptive logistics solutions that you can look at, and I think this is one example where things can be considered in a different way from how things are traditionally done, or complementary to traditional approaches to logistics. Trinidad, needless to say, has been a great and a ready solution for the exploration phase. Just to set the scene, this is a little bit of what I would like to talk to you about. It's around a total concept, a concept of a total sea base versus a shore base. I think we've all had some you know, information over the, let's say, the last year around discussions for shore bases and setting up logistics and running logistics out of Guyana. What I can tell you is this is a little bit of a paradigm shift where you consider the concept of, in fact, setting up a sea base versus a shore base or complementary to a shore base. So in the context of what we'll be discussing today, this is, I would say, a very large vessel. I think everyone has been familiar with aircraft carriers that support basically a floating airstrip. This is essentially a floating shore base setup that can be configured in such a way that it can enable deep draft, shallow draft, and other logistics opportunities, particularly when some of the considerations and challenges that you will face in Guyana and that Guyana faces and needs to consider as part of its development. Number one, having a very silted up coastline with large sandbars that extend between 10 to 25 miles wide along the coastal strip. In addition to that, Guyana has quite environmentally sensitive areas as well that should be considered. And, you know, in terms of disrupting, you know, the wildlife, the bird life, the mangroves, the fisheries habitat, and, you know, how can we minimize that footprint and minimize the disruption to some of those areas that, of course, make perfect sense, that whatever we do, we should do it in the right way. not only for the industry, but also for the environment and for the people of Guyana. Some of the other challenges, of course, there's an urgent need and a pressing need to catalyze and trigger early Guyanese participation in the industry. And of course, bringing logistics into Guyana will enable a big step in that direction of developing the Guyanese potential and developing more and more Guyanese to participate in the industry. Besides that, of course, the project in itself is around more than 70 nautical miles offshore. And as soon as you get into the realm of exceeding 70 nautical miles offshore, the economics of operating efficient, cost-effective logistics become challenging. More boats required, and other considerations in terms of the time to mobilize, etc., that have an impact on operations that can end up being quite costly to the project economics. Liza Phase 1 is a schedule-driven, ultra-deep water project. It is a mega capital project by any scale. And so there are major implications for not getting this right and for running the project in Guyana on suboptimal logistics. The shallow draft considerations, because of Guyana's silted coastline, heavily silted coastline, is a key consideration in terms of the dredging and the cost of dredging and the continuous dredging requirements that will be required to keep the channels open. So the Demerara River, for example, at high tide has a draft, depending on where you are, 6 to 7.5 meters. And of course, there are several risks and consideration when utilizing the channels through the sandbank to come in onshore Guyana, in Georgetown, for example, using the channels that exist to access across the sandbar getting into Georgetown. I heard one story last night where someone who is very involved in shipping told me that when you have two ships passing each other across this channel, it can be very, very, very challenging. Indeed, one of their vessels recently managed to, passing another vessel, one vessel coming in, one vessel going out, managed in a very tight restriction of the channel to end up on a sandbank and remain there for two tides until it could eventually get off the sandbank. So when you're running a very high-cost logistics operation and a very capital-intensive project like Liza Phase 1 development, it's critical that we don't have these kind of events when you have $1 million spread, $1 million spread per day sitting offshore, waiting on deliveries of cement, deliveries of mud, deliveries of pipe. So logistics absolutely critical to the success of the project. Long steaming times, of course, once you get over 70 nautical miles, will greatly increase the number of vessels required to supply your operation offshore. So typically in an operation like Liza Phase 1, they're going to be probably around 8 to 10 vessels of different forms: tugs, platform supply vessels, fast supply vessels, crew boats, whatever. A whole range of vessels involved in this type of operation. Of course, Guyana, as a backdrop, has very limited port infrastructure today, largely geared towards the cargo terminal business, and it's quite fragmented as well. So a number of small cargo ports along the Demerara River for the most part. And in the Berbice, there's of course the transshipment of the bauxite with the company, the Russian company Rusal, maintaining a channel on the Berbice River that's slightly deeper at high tide than the channel in the Demerara. So key considerations, and of course one of the key considerations the government is having is around putting a shore base into the Berbice area around Crab Island. And so what I will share with you today is a concept and a system, and of course develop it into a reality, and potentially a reality and a consideration for Guyana that will be complementary to that shore basin development that will likely happen in the Burmese region. Just to give you a little illustration of the coastal region of Guyana, as the dear Mr. Dennison presented earlier, and of course I think you've seen from the Halliburton presentation earlier, they are, lots of sands have been deposited over hundreds of millions of years offshore Guyana. And that's why we have these great reservoirs and prospects to explore and of course develop offshore in Guyana. Organic deposits, the sands, of course they create a restriction for access, but they're a windfall in terms of the potential that they have for enabling Guyana to become a world-class offshore producer of oil. Land of many waters, lots of deposits offshore, and of course the challenge to be overcome will be the silting and access to the port and the land facility to support logistics. Some of the key considerations in putting this package together that we discussed with several members of our team and people skilled in the art of offshore logistics, oil and gas services, and of course operators that utilize these services, is what could be done differently. And we've looked at the opportunity of how we could change the game. And the game changer for us is really a paradigm shift in how you operate in certain offshore environments. Environmentally sensitive areas, areas with restricted access, areas that need continuous dredging and can only have access to shallow draft vessels. And so I think this positions Guyana for a unique opportunity where we can mobilize a system like this very, very quickly, considering the nature of what it, and the value creation that it has to offer Guyana. So within 24 months or so, a vessel like this can be quickly converted and customized, fit for purpose, for the deep water draft business and to support Guyana becoming a regional port and logistics hub with deep draft and shallow draft capability. It will, of course, facilitate and enable an early Guyanization plan as well. More Guyanese coming into the industry is only a good thing. As some of you may have noted from the introduction from Mr. Hughes earlier today, Guyana needs development. Guyana has been waiting a long time for development. And I think there's a great opportunity for us not to look back in 3 and 5 years and say, hey, we missed an opportunity to really make things happen in Guyana. So great opportunity in that respect of supporting Guyanese and Guyanese participation in the industry. Of course, a system like this must reduce cost and risk, and will reduce cost and risk for a major logistics operation. The typical cost of a system like this can be between 180 to 275, 300 million US dollars. And of course, systems like this can be leased. Of course, they can be moved and repositioned strategically as developments occur offshore. And bearing in mind, a lot of the mega developments are occurring very far offshore, around 200 kilometers offshore. So this system will pay for itself if you consider reducing the number of vessels that you have involved supporting and supplying a logistics operation for deep water developments in Guyana, probably by the order of magnitude of 50% or more. And that cost alone will give you a payback probably in 3 to 5 years in that region. The solution, a little bit on the solution. And what I'm illustrating here is the total dynamic floating port facility. In fact, this photograph is an example of one that's just been set up in Saudi Arabia. So compliments of Saudi Aramco, who are doing some developments in remote areas offshore the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, have in fact pioneered and set up a floating sea base, a total sea base. to support these remote operations, where it didn't make sense for them to build a port facility or complementary to their existing port facilities. They're utilizing this facility as a staging area. Typical length specification is between 180 to 300 meters, depending on your requirements. Basically the size of, almost the size of a large tanker FPSO or equivalent to. The beam is between 60 to 80 meters. Fuel water capacity, of course, bulk capacity, cement, mud, and the other chemicals that are needed for the operation can all be accommodated. It has accommodation facilities for between 300 and 500 people. So a very large operation, a fully integrated shore-based setup that actually sits outside of the sandbank, is anchored beyond the sandbank, is not affected by tides or anything else. Can cut logistics costs for everything coming in to Guyana, not having to come onshore, but go directly in Guyana's waters to Guyana's sea base. And having a sea base like this will be something that will allow Guyana to regionally support other basins like Suriname, etc. And in addition to having a great shore-based setup as well to support the oil and gas industry as that evolves and progressively is developed over the years to come. But this essentially gives Guyana a fast-track solution to participate, active participation in its industry. And the functions of a facility like this will include the heliport, customs clearance, pipe yard, technical services, accommodation, of course, chemicals, supply, services and spares, supply base that essentially reduces the risk, cuts your cost, and allows you to have an active participation in your industry very early on. As I mentioned, thanks to Aramco for pioneering this technology, which was launched in 2016. In fact, there's an article in the Offshore magazine that if any of you have an interest, is a reference to their pioneering efforts in this realm of creating a total sea base. Cutting cost, saving time, reducing risk, and enhancing Guyanese participation. Another example here, this was a study done by the Australian Maritime College, extensive study performed by them in 2014. Maritime Institutes have in fact done a lot of work in this area, particularly when they looked at LNG projects, schedule-driven projects, and other developments requiring operations to be conducted in sensitive areas like around the Great Barrier Reef, limiting the number of let's say, permanent developments in environmentally sensitive mangrove areas and stuff like that. So, you know, this is not only making environmental sense, it's making it's changing the economics of their projects as well. In a nutshell, the features and benefits of the total sea base, it will accelerate the participation of Guyana and Guyanese in its industry. It'll provide a cost-effective and a complementary solution to the ongoing shore-based developments in Guyana, whether those be the shore-based developments for Phase 1 in the Demerara River near Georgetown, or the larger development of a shore-based fit for purpose for the oil and gas industry for decades to come in the Berbice, Crab Island area. So complementary to supporting deep draft activity, supporting immediate entry into the business for Guyana, and reducing the overall operational risk in terms of the project risk that is being carried related to logistics. With that, I'd like to thank everyone and the team. Sorry, you'll see us around here if you have any questions. And with that, I'll conclude the presentation. Thank you.
Our next presenter, Mr. Craig Hume from Subsea, in Taxi, sorry. He is the executive engineer with the Subsea Systems. A little bit on Mr. Hume. He has been in engineering for 14 years in project delivery, experience in subsea pipelines, subsea systems and hardware, and new technology development. Mr. Hume obtained his engineering master's degree from the University of Newcastle in the United Kingdom. Mr. Hume is a UK chartered engineer and chartered marine engineer and has worked on major projects in the North Sea, Gulf of Mexico, Caspian Sea, Persian Gulf, and Arctic regions. Mr. Hume has also consulted for major operating companies such as BP, ExxonMobil, within their respective subsea organizations. Mr. Hume is also an active participant in the industry codes and standards working committees, in particular in the API 17 sub-series. Ladies and gents, please welcome Mr. Hume.
So, I'm really here to talk today a little bit about some of the activities that are going to be going on offshore Guyana here in the next few years. But really, I want to give a kind of a very high-level discussion on subsea. Our Senior Vice President, Brian McShane, was down in Guyana recently, and he gave I think it was the second public lecture, very high-level overview of the entire kind of offshore space. So some of these slides, if you attended that in the first half of this presentation, I'm going to repeat some of those slides, but then I really want to take that with a focus on the subsea portion, and then where that's going in the future, and some of the emerging technologies that have really come about in the last sort of 10, 15, 20 years that can really add significant value in the deep water. So first, a little bit about us. IntechSea is a kind of a major engineering and project execution company globally. Our nearest office is actually in Trinidad, and with me today I have Mr. Philip Julien, who is the regional director for CARICOM, and Douglas Boyce, who's the business development lead in that office for IntechSea. So feel free to stop any of us. I'm going to cover a lot of information, but I'm happy to talk about it. Grab any one of us three, ask any questions. Between here, coffee, bar, whatever. Happy to talk about it in more detail if you have any questions that we don't have time to take today. So quick history on offshore oil and gas. It's actually a lot older than most people think. This is a guy called Thomas Rowland. This is an old patent from 1869. Although this was never built, this is really far ahead of its time. An offshore production and offloading patent. Late 1800s, start to see offshore. I say offshore, but first sort of saltwater production wells in California. They use a pier system. Then 1947, really the first commercial offshore oil and gas well drilled outside of land was by Kerr-McGee, southern Louisiana. And then we start to see the kind of emergence of subsea. This was one of the first trees, 1962, the Shell Molina field offshore Santa Barbara in California. And then things really started to pick up in the North Sea in the 70s. This is the Ekofisk tree. And then from there, we've really come on a long way. So some benchmarking for you. This is a bit of an eye chart, so don't worry about if you can't read it. But ultimately, this is kind of a kind of matrix of step-out distances for subsea tiebacks to a host versus water depth. And the key takeaway from here is that the Sheltley and the Liza field is really somewhere in the middle here on the left. It's well within the industry capabilities and experience. So there's no boundaries being pushed in terms of technology. This is should be a relatively typical offshore deepwater development. So the current economic climate, I talk about this a lot. I am passionate about it. I see in the media a lot. You hear all this rhetoric about we're in this low price environment and it's doomsday. And we're really not. If you look at the inflation-adjusted monthly spot prices of crude from 1946 all the way up to 2016, look at some of these averages from 1980 to 2016. It's $53. Even all the way back, it's 42. So we're kind of in that range. So we're seeing just considerable industry normalization. And yes, there is a reduction in capital spending, but that's more about becoming more efficient with how that capital is deployed. We're seeing projects be reframed, some of them more marginal wells, condensed and consolidation across these industries. So, the offshore oil and gas industry is not about a short-term swing production. I think you've heard a lot about how Liza is it's a fast-track project, and it is a very fast-track project. Typically, these projects are 10 years, 15 years in the making. And so, the operators are really looking at the oil price, out 10, 15 years. They don't really care about what it is doing tomorrow. And that's where shale comes in. That provides that short-term swing production. So they operate, they operate in totally different portfolios of the operator's resource base. So I want to touch on, okay, call this Subsea 101. I mean, we're going to go through this pretty quick. So if anyone here is familiar with the subsea industry, you're just going to have to bear with me. It's going to be fairly high level, but I really want to kind of do some jargon busting, show you some of the equipment that is typical, and then we'll move into more of the advanced technologies that we've seen, and then that's where things get a little bit more get a bit more cool. So the first thing to bear in mind is that the subsea portion of any offshore development is just one piece of the jigsaw. You have to look at the big picture, and when you make a discovery, and wherever that may be, you have to basically that feasibility and that conceptual selection period is it covers all of the elements in this. You've got the top side, you've got the location of whether it's going to be an FPSO, whether it's going to be a fixed platform, whether it's going to be a TLP. And then the subsea portion is obviously how you can maximize the value from a single host. And like I said, that's what really takes a lot of time at the front end. That can take years of engineering and testing against different economic metrics to make sure that you get the most cost-effective solution at the end of the day. So, I want to move in now and but for today, focus really on the subsea portion. So why subsea? Well, we can't. There's not really one binary answer to that question. But if I had to pick one, I'd say it's generally more capitally efficient to have a single host offshore and then multiple wells that all tie back to that host, rather than multiple hosts. And that that's really the key takeaway there. And the other thing is drilling challenges. It'd be great to be able to drill all these targets from one location. Sometimes it's not feasible. The oil companies have a very high risk tolerance in drilling success and probability of success, and it has to be, they're really looking to be around about 95% probability of success of being able to hit that target. So, if they're less than that from a single location, they really have no choice but to go subsea and then tie it back where they can improve that chance of actually hitting that optimal zone in the reservoir. So 101 again, some high level kind of jargon busting. First off is your subsea tree. This is really the piece of equipment that sits on the wellhead and allows you to remotely control the flow from or to that well in an injection system. It allows you to monitor what's going on at the wellhead and also downhole, as well as be able to control, shut down, and inject chemicals downhole for optimum for flow assurance, and inject chemicals at the wellhead. Manifold, again, if you have, say, 2 or more wells in a drill center, you're going to need some kind of gathering and distribution system. It's really the job of the manifold. Come in all shapes and sizes, can be very small, can be very large. This is where there is a little bit of creative license in subsea engineering. Plet, this is really just an anchor structure for your pipeline. Gives you that firm base for anchoring obviously the pipeline and flow line, but also for the jumper mechanically, so that you can leave that down there producing for a long time, so it's structurally sound. So the pipelines, flow lines, this is really how you're going to take your subsea production back to market, or you're going to use this to inject send your water out for re-injection or gas injection at the actual drill center. And then, you need to be able to communicate and control all these systems. So you're going to need hydraulic power, you're going to need chemicals, you're going to need power and communications, and that usually comes through the umbilical, through a UTA, which is really like a manifold for all those services, and then individual flying leads out to the structures, and then a subsea control module of some sorts, which really acts as the brain for an individual component. So some generic subsea layouts, again, highly hypothetical, but if you have a single well, tie that back. It's a single subsea tree. There's no manifold here. You don't need any kind of gathering or distribution, so it ties straight into a plet back to the host. Now, these can be single opportunities that obviously wouldn't be economic on their own, so you do a small subsea tieback. Sometimes they're strategic. Sometimes there is a lease expiry date that is coming up, and there is pressure for an operating company to actually produce from that lease, to maintain that lease, so they'll go ahead and do a single tieback. Or it's really could be a kind of a test well, see if they can actually produce through that. Things get a little bit more compact in a template system where you may have 2 or 3 wells, and you put down a large structure and you can drill through that structure, and then you can land your trees directly on top, and that also acts as somewhat of a gathering station. You find these more common in the shallow waters, especially in the North Sea where there's fishing. It's more efficient for putting a protection structure over there for overtrawl. And then, more common with the deep water, we have these clustered drill centers. So you may have, 2, 3, 6 wells around a manifold and a looped pipeline system for displacing that crude in shutdowns. And then things get a little bit more extensive when you have these satellite wells that are kind of a further step out from a gathering host. Again, it all comes down to what is the most capitally efficient way of developing a subsea project. Then simple daisy chain, I think of this as like a number of single well tiebacks, but basically in series. And sometimes you'll find several operators or 2 operators may get together and do a joint development on one of these, tie it back to even another host, an operated by other host. So there's a lot of pretty pictures in there, cartoons, trying to give a flavor of what this is actually really like and some of the scale of this. Equipment weights can be in the thousands of tons. Most of this equipment is designed to operate at 10,000 feet, which is 7 times the height of the Empire State Building. And at that depth, you're seeing hydrostatic pressures of greater than 4,000 psi. So really significant design challenges. And of course, the only way you can actually manipulate any of this equipment and intervene with any of this equipment is by remotely operated vehicles. Essentially, remote controlled robots that are flown from the surface by a pilot on a boat, and they can activate valves, inject chemicals, and all that good stuff. But again, it presents a lot of challenges for how you actually go about designing this equipment, and it can drive its size. So that's a kind of a high-level overview of where we're at. I don't know, 100 mile an hour through the world of subsea, but to give you a flavor of some of the delivery challenges you see in some of these deep water fields, and really frame some context for the technology talk is, so water depth is the first one. So you have, in deeper water, you have an extremely large hydrostatic head of, a column of fluid that generates a very high pressure that is fighting back against that reservoir pressure. These tiebacks are can be long distance. So coupled with that hydrostatic head in the riser system and the pipeline system, you have this frictional factor as well, which is contributing to that overall back pressure on the reservoir. And then, as if to make things worse, obviously your pressure in your reservoir does not stay at a constant. As soon as you start producing that, you start to see pressure decline, and you may start to see an increase of water breakthrough, which then increases the density of that fluid in the riser, which then increases that back pressure on the system. So you're constantly fighting this battle of really nature and gravity to be able to produce these wells effectively. But that's really where the opportunity comes in for new technologies, and the emergence of some of the subsea technologies we're going to talk about in a minute is really aimed at decoupling some of these issues from the reservoir. So what I mean by that, I'm really talking about subsea processing. Subsea processing is a kind of a generic term that's been given to an area of emerging technology over the last sort of 15 to 20 years, really accelerating in the last 10 years, and it comprises really of 4 key elements I'm going to talk about today. So really subsea boosting, so that is a subsea pump, for example, single phase, multi-phase. Typically these reservoirs don't give us nice, steady single phase fluids, so we have to have a capability to handle gas. Multi-phase is kind of typically up there at 0 to 90% GVF or free gas in the flow. Most of them operate around 30 to 40 with excursions through transient conditions to 90%. Gas compression, again, above sort of 90% to 100% of free gas. It's really wet gas compression. Subsea separation is a technology that is used to basically complement the other two and make that more efficient. And then electrical flow line heating, which is really a way of optimizing the flow assurance characteristics. So it's all about enhancing overall recovery. So key takeaway from this slide, I think, is the average global recovery factors for an oil well in deep water, 20 to 40%. There's a huge opportunity to increase that if you can make that reservoir produce more. And some of these charts are really kind of, summarizing what that opportunity is with, say, for example, a subsea pump. With a subsea pump, you're essentially installing a secondary energy source at the seabed. So what you're really doing is lowering that suction side pressure to the wells, which in theory is like raising the well, up through the water column nearer the surface, so you have less of that hydrostatic head. It decouples that from the well, allows the well to flow more, and then you just have to size the pump to be able to accommodate that pressure, that throughput, and and sufficiently, not backlog any other system itself. Statoil Tortoise was a good example where you had separation boosting and re-injection of the separated water subsea. You see overall recovery there of about 6% increase, which really doesn't sound much, but that equates to 35 million barrels of additional oil. So where are we today? Well, subsea pumping leads the way. 20 currently installed, 5 in manufacture. I think the manufacturers have done a great job of really de-risking that technology, and the early adopters of that have had great success. Compression, separation. And when we talk about subsea pumping, there's a couple of different concepts. Really, the middle one on this picture is the most common, which is really putting the pumps in a manifold structure and on the mud line, and then having the trees and the well, the manifold flow into that, and then the boosted flow downstream back to the host. The one on the left is a caisson drilled into kind of a sub-well, if you like, and just a shallow well on the surface with an electrically submersible pump. Typically works with lower GVS. Shell have got those going on in the BC10 project. So yeah, we're up there right now, around about 3 megawatts, 3,000 psi differential pressure. Again, that's highly variable on conditions, but for a true multi-phase, 3,000 psi with throughputs of up to 80,000 barrels a day per pump. Designing that pressure vessel to be able to, if you think a tank, designing a tank for these pressures is not like designing a separator on the surface. So there's a lot of design challenges there, which is why you see lots of different shape factors and pipe shape, kind of gravity separation style separators and big footprints. Then finally, active flow line heating. So really what you're trying to do here is create a stable environment within the pipeline for an inherently unstable crude oil. One of the biggest challenges with these step outs is the flow assurance. Some of the temperatures, ambient temperatures of these water depths can be just above freezing. So it presents a lot of opportunity for these unstable crudes to precipitate wax. You have hydrate issues. And if you can maintain that flow line at a modest temperature throughout that step out, it creates that more stable environment. Like you see on this chart here, and the opportunity there is really to save considerable amounts of money on life of field chemical injection and treatment. There's 2 real types: direct electric heat and electric heat tracing. Electric heat tracing is kind of a more efficient system, but it's kind of more of an emerging technology and some difficulties in manufacturing. But again. So where do we go from here? Well, the key message and the key takeaway from this is really, we've de-risked a lot of this technology, and we should be considering it in every project that we develop now, even if it's just to discount its use. We have the safety, and we've showed the increased recovery and the reliability. Now we need to test these systems against all of our project economics, because the upside can be potentially huge, especially in brownfield. So enhanced oil recovery in late life, we see a lot of that now, where capital spending is being reduced. We're looking for these brownfield enhanced oil recovery opportunities to install a pump in some older wells perhaps, or an older field, and then really pull that oil final recovery factor up, lower that abandonment pressure, and leave fewer reserves in place. So, pie in the sky type thinking, I think for the future of subsea, I know in Norway, they've been great pioneers of subsea technology and subsea processing. There's this kind of theory about, or there's a kind of a long-term plan to be able to, enable sort of subsea to shore complete production systems and do away with the host completely. So with that, I'm sorry about the 100-mile-an-hour fly-through, but we covered a lot of ground. Hopefully it's served to whet your appetite for some of the activities that are going on offshore. But yeah, any specific questions, feel free to kind of stop us later or fire them away. Thanks.
If you appreciate in 20 years we're now doing subsea separation, subsea boosting, more and more things are going on subsea. How long, in your opinion, do you think we're going to see platformless, assuming you have a pipeline to get your product, be it oil or gas, to shore? But how long do you anticipate? In 20 years' time, will we see offshore developments with no platforms?
So yeah, good question. It's difficult to give an exact kind of generic answer. I think it's highly specific on the field. But to answer your question, I think absolutely, yeah. In Norway, they're looking at, Ormen Lange was looking at tying back, to the shore from the subsea. A gas system has a greater. You don't have the hydrostatic head issues with gas. You just have the frictional issues. So with compression, yeah, I think we can see a lot of gas systems going that way. Oil is probably a little bit more tricky with just the flow assurance aspects and that reduced step out distance that you can actually have. Typically it's around about 30 miles now. I know there's extremes out there, but yeah, we'll see subsea to shore, I'm pretty sure, in the next 20 years. It won't be the rule of thumb, but yeah, we'll see that emerging.
Question for Mr. Dennison. What field development plans does GGMC have for the new discovery at Liza and potentially what's coming up in Snoop?
Well, I don't know that it's supposed to be broadcast, but we do have field development plans for Liza, which is pursuant to the requirement of the application under the production license. And the concept there is dealing with the FPSO. So,
follow-up question. And in terms of our technical capacity, I know GGMC, I believe you're the only person in the department. Do we have plans for expanding out that capacity to deal with the development of the field long term?
Yes, certainly. We're not going to be doing it alone. And at the present moment, I'm actually engaging some expert consultations for helping us treat with the developed plans that have been tabled for us to review. I'm not at this point going to say who we're looking at, but very shortly.
Hi, my name is Andrew Hart from Hart Energy and Trading. The question is for Mr. Mangal. If the TDFP is successful, you speak of it as complementary to shore base, but I'm wondering whether you actually need a shore base at all.
No doubt you'll need a shore base, and within the ranges that we're talking about, for bulk supply and other things, to have that being sent and shuttled and crews, etc., to and from the total sea base, let's say the TDFP facility, you'll have to have a fit-for-purpose shore base setup to be able to support that. So it's complementary to a shore base. Yes, a shore base, and many shore bases probably will be required. You look at the North Sea, you look at Australia, you look at big basins where they've developed a significant hydrocarbon business, and Norway, for example, 2 million barrels, has around between Norway and the UK around 20 shore bases across the region, and they do 2 million barrels. Guyana going to 500,000 barrels probably within the next 5 to 10 years, 2-3 FPSOs within the next 5 to 10 years. For sure, you're going to have to bring logistics from Guyana, catering, supplies, crews, bulk, chemicals, large, storage of materials, etc., to be transited and shuttled in and out. Of course, where you can optimize in the cost and value saving is from bringing it directly to the sea base. So if you bring it to the sea base and you don't transit everything through the shore base, there's an optimization there, and that's where the value creation comes from, having a sea base complementary to the shore base.
Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Sean Rampasad. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at RAMS. First of all, I want to congratulate Bobby and GOGA. I think you guys have put on a really good conference, and I feel honored to be here. I just want to say something about the logistics. I think Guyanese sometimes have to toot their own horns a little bit more, and you'll have to be a little bit more proud of what happens. I'll say to you that Exxon has drilled 6 deep water wells in Guyana, and the majority of that logistics has actually been supported from Georgetown. You load more vessels in Georgetown than you load from Trinidad. And for you guys to have successfully completed 6 deep water wells with almost 0 NPT for logistics and a very, very enviable HSE record, that's something to be proud of. And you do have a responsible operator in Georgetown, because from day number 1, Exxon insisted that all the tubulars ran out of Georgetown. So you have 300-foot PSVs, some of the largest PSVs in the world, that come up the Demerara River and load full loads out of there and go back out to the rig. So I think the future of what happens in logistics in Guyana is very bright. There's a lot that's happening right now, and we need to keep building it. And Lars did a wonderful presentation on the total floating dock. Those are the kind of things that have to complement the shore bases. And the whole idea of supporting Suriname operations from Georgetown makes a lot of sense. One of the things that I would like to see we discuss more around logistics is the whole idea of the regulatory agencies. One of the biggest challenges with logistics, and especially when you have a cross-border program, and that's another thing, Exxon ran a cross-border program with almost 0 NPT. And I haven't worked on a lot of programs across the world, but that's almost unheard of. So I think when it comes to logistics, the Guyanese have done very well on logistics. We need to continue building on it. There are, of course, some challenges when it comes to the geography and exactly where you're located. And there are a lot of ideas that will come that have to support what is already there. But we also need to focus on the regulatory agencies, free zones, and the ideas of scaling this program. The level of investment that's required when there's a single operator and 17 wells, to me sometimes it's worrying. In Trinidad we've drilled 500 wells and we have 5 or 6 major operators. So I think we also have to be very careful as to where we put that investment dollars up front. How do we utilize what we already have in place and better utilize it? And how do we work more closely with the operators to ensure that more logistics remains in Georgetown? Thank you.
Emma, I have a question for you, and it's probably a stupid question, but I guess you never stop learning in this business. You talked about the way back when Guyana basically was attached to West Africa. And we accept the premise that oil was formed by plant material and animal material going down the river and being deposited, and after 10, 20, 30 million years, whatever, turning into oil. My question is that the oil offshore of Guyana, is that from the rivers in Guyana, or is that from the rivers in Africa? But then if Guyana was attached to Africa, there were no rivers. So, in other words, the source of the oil offshore of Guyana, did it come from Africa or did it come from Guyana?
Very good question. But, most of the oil is generated by algae, phytoplankton, what is material that is lying on the sea. It has a vegetal origin, but it doesn't come from the rivers. It's living on the sea. This material, and sometimes of the history of the Earth, is accumulated in very high rates because there are, for example, paleogeographical features that restrict the water circulation, so it gets accumulated and then it gets deposited in the sea level bottom, and it can be converted to hydrocarbons in the future. So it doesn't come from Africa or from South America, it's really on the sea.
Hello, good day. My name is Maisha Nurse and I'm from the Curry Group in Suriname. And I have a question for Mr. Mangal. I know that Exxon has a social responsibility to Guyana, and the floating setup, isn't that in contradiction with that social responsibility?
Not at all. In fact, what it does, it accelerates activity into the Guyana Basin. Quite a bit of the logistics, certainly deep draft logistics, and when you get into the construction phases of the development, you will find that a lot of it will not be able to access readily through the sandbar, the ports onshore in Guyana. So certainly for a lot of the deep draft construction stuff, it will either have to come from Trinidad, or, which of course extends the transit time by up to 2 days, or if with the option of a sea base that's mobile and can be strategically placed in Guyana's waters, do the operations from within Guyana's waters on a vessel that of course is based out in Guyana's waters, is crewed by Guyanese, and is actually, I think, to answer your question, a key CSR that I would be looking at if I was in Exxon shoes, because it strategically accelerates and enables and facilitates Guyana's participation in the industry in a very active and strategic way.
Maybe it's because of my lack of understanding of these dynamics and logistics, but more or less I want to make some inquiries on the main risk. I think it is Mr. Dennison who had mentioned that, on the main risk in the Guyana Basin in regards to sea and timing. If you can expound on that, it will open up my understanding.
Okay, I want to qualify that the risk I'm talking about is not like the risk that you do walking down the step and stumping your toe. It's the risk that's attached to the probability of making a discovery. And in any petroleum system, there are some components that have to be present if you're going to have the opportunity to make a discovery, having identified a prospect to drill. And that's what I'm referring to. We can't guarantee that when we postulate from analyzing seismics and such, that what we expect to be sealing formations are indeed present. We can't guarantee that after having that done, that the oil that we expected to migrate into those particular traps, which we thought were there for the oil to migrate into, that has actually happened. So that's what I am talking about when I refer to risk.
Hi there, my name is Karen Hawker. I come from Newfoundland. I specialize in local content and communications. Question for Craig, actually, relating to subsea technology. A lot of the business community here will be looking at opportunities to participate in the industry around local content in particular. Where do you see some opportunities for the community here with regards to subsea technology over the life of the field in terms of opportunity here?
Yeah, that's a good question. And, you know, first and foremost, Newfoundland, I spent a lot of time there when I was working for Exxon. It's a great place, but it's a good model, actually, for some of the activities that are kind of emerging here. With regard to the subsea equipment, I think in the near term, it will be challenging because it's so specialized and because of the risk involved and the manufacturing and the quality control and its high pressure containing and controlling equipment. I think that's still going to be supplied from the local centers of excellence where the manufacturers are there. I think Brazil may be an opportunity for some of this equipment to come out of in the near term, and I think that could provide learnings. In the long term, yeah, I mean, I think, again, it comes down to logistics. I mean, some of this kit is extremely heavy, which means you need, shore bases that are capable of handling that kind of equipment, you know, these kind of weights, test facilities, craneage, and these deep water docks to be able to load that equipment out. So I think, you know, that should be the long-term goal. In the near term, I think it will be challenging to manufacture some of the big subsea equipment here, for sure. I don't think that excludes the micro, actually. I think there's a lot of smaller stuff. If you focus, you know, the human brain always focuses on the macro, but I think the opportunities in the near term are much with the smaller bits, the widgets, you know, and lifting equipment, things like that. I think is a good opportunity.
If I could add. And thanks, Craig, for making a very good point there regarding some of the big pieces of subsea equipment that need to be handled. And of course, it kind of supports the shore base, the sea base, complementary to the the shore base and that discussion. But just to answer the question on technologies, I think, yes, Brazil's an option for bringing equipment out of Brazil, and of course, I think there are value-added opportunities too for Guyana to look at smaller, maybe as Craig says, I don't call them widgets, but I say technologies for the subsea arena, such as ROVs, constructing, building ROVs, remotely operated vehicles in Guyana, running and setting up a business that actually is origin Guyana, can be easily done. And we've seen it done in Aberdeen, in Norway, in different parts of the world as they have developed into the oil and gas business. So there's nothing, even Brazil, for example, so there's nothing stopping Guyana from embarking on a few technology development projects, and I think it's going to be important for the indigenous development of Guyana's participation, that we do look at some technology development initiatives that can be started onshore Guyana and not have to come from overseas.
Just a quick comment. Carlos Latorre, I work for Technip FMC. I spent a lot of time in Africa, in Newfoundland as well. In my experience, a lot of what can be done here and can be done in a very relatively short time frame is really all not necessarily the technology, but the structure that goes around. For instance, in Ghana, we have a lot of experience manufacturing manifolds. Yes, the components, the valves, the connectors come from overseas, but they are assembled by local companies in Ghana. Basically, what you need is capable welders. It's not the same welding a manifold and welding a line of pipe, so it takes a lot of investment in training and capabilities, but definitely it's not only the widgets, it's also these parts of equipment that are not necessarily the core of the technology, but that are accessories, but of course essential for the project to happen.
My name is Desmond Roberts from Perfection Services Limited, Managing Director and CEO. We are an inspection company that is accredited by UCAS of the United Kingdom. We have been doing inspection in Trinidad for the past, since 2006, with contracts with BP, British Gas, and most of the companies in Trinidad. So one question I want to ask is, before I ask that question, we also have the company registered in Guyana as an inspection company. So a couple of meetings ago I had with Exxon. Most of the equipment that's coming to Guyana has been inspected in the UK and in the US. When you could have the same technology in Trinidad and in Guyana, where you could train the Guyanese to do the inspection for any lifting and offshore operation going to the offshore platforms. So I just wanted to share that. There is the technology here that we can do the inspection in Guyana. And I want to know what is your take on using the technology that we have in Guyana. Thank you.
Yeah, so I mean, I agree with you 100%. Again, it all comes down to the time frame. There's that transitional period which you have to incorporate training and building that inspection workforce, and that's all opportunity. But yeah, I agree. I think that's one area that you say that equipment is inspected out of the manufacturers, but equipment is inspected every time it's landed in a new location and tested again, really, all the way to installation on the offshore site. So there is multiple opportunities on that delivery path, if you like.
Well, absolutely, and regardless of what comes out at the governmental level for the regulatory agencies, the Petroleum Commission of Guyana or whatever, there will have to be collaboration if we're going to get on a trajectory to build the self-confidence and the self-reliability that is required.
You had many diagrams. There were two palimpsestic maps, one of the Stanominian-Turonian and one of the Santonian Campanian. And also there was a diagram showing the Borborema and the Roraima uplifts. Now, were the uplifts related to deposition of reservoir rocks? And the palimpsestic maps, the Turonian Sanomanian, was that related to source rock development? What about the Campanian Santonian? Was that source or was that reservoir?
Thank you. So the Sanomanian-Turonian is related to the source rock. Is this first world-class source rock, the Kanji Formation, correlated to La Luna throughout the whole South America. And then the Campanian Santonian, I am a global geologist, not an expert in Guyanese geology, but I was referring into reservoirs for that interval in my case. And then the other question was about the palinspastic maps and if the uplift was related to the reservoir. So the uplift, when we quantify uplift, means that the hinterland is being pulled up, probably due to thinning of the oceanic crust offshore, and these have implications to the reservoir or the amount of sediment deposited offshore because it increases the profile of the basin, and we have a higher steeper profile, and hence the position of more sediments. I don't know if you want to add something on this.
On that, in all of the flexuring that has occurred in the basin, you would recognize that from time to time, some of those materials would have been out and in of the maturity window. So depending on how that occurs is whether or not you would have had the material, the source material, either being earlier or later within the sequence.
Hello. Yeah, I'd just like to make an observation on the local content. My name is Sean Ryan from Scantech Offshore, and we operate in Asia Pacific, West Africa, and in Brazil, and we provide air compressors and steam generators for well test support primarily. And we're often asked in these different locations to provide local content. And one of the things that is really difficult for a small service company like ourselves is there to be a recognition of the cost to actually train local people. Now, we've been successful in Nigeria and Brazil, and we have a pool of people now in these locations, whereas the same could happen in Guyana, where they're now going around the world. But what has to recognize is that there has to be a mechanism and a recognition from the government that training does cost money, and also with Exxon and the other operating companies. And what we often find is that, you know, they want the local content and they want the service companies to provide all the training without any return. And I think what has to happen is that there has to be a recognition that training costs money, and it needs to be paid for out of some funding. And I'd like to think that if Guyana recognizes this fact, then there could be a great potential to have local operating people, Guyanese, operating around the world. Thank you.
Sorry, your name?
My name is Sean Ryan.
Sean, it's a very good point, and you know, I think just to answer a little bit on the training, because that's very, very close to our core, why we have established and what we've established in Guyana. It's indeed critical that you have the sponsors to kickstart the training and development, recruitment, training and development of Guyanese to go into the industry. And I think unless you get that commitment early on, you're going to look back in 3 and 5 years and realize that you've missed an opportunity to have Guyanese in the industry. I have some great stories from Guyanese that have participated and gone internationally. Of course, you know, myself Guyanese as well, worked internationally and you know, working back here now. You know, there was a story of one of the platform supply vessel companies that came into Guyana to support the early exploration work, and they recruited all the captains and the first mates from the bauxite shipping companies. And it just so happened that a lot of the talented seamen from Guyana, captains, skippers, first mates, have moved on to international positions, and you know, they essentially had, for a period of time, shut down the bauxite industry. So you know, there are many things that we have to do in terms of building capacity, but I think the big one is kick-starting and being proactive and doing it now, not in the future. You have to start now. You have to get put the energy behind it.
do the brute force work that needs to be put into training and developing and recruiting Guyanese right now, and not take it lightly. So it's something that we are passionately committed to doing, working with Exxon and the other operators, and of course working with the ministries involved, Ministry of Education, working with the universities as well and the technical institutions in the relevant areas. So, you know, it's a great question, and hence my comments, yeah?
And the second observation is that, as you mentioned with training, I think this whole question of training, I'm not sure if it just selects some people and send them for training and so on. It seems to me that, to a certain degree, Jamaica, Trinidad, Barbados, and Guyana are involved in some aspect of oil exploration, refining, something. Suriname as well, of course. And there's no reason why, to my mind, having lived a year in Nigeria and seen nothing happen in Nigeria other than using the money from oil as against getting involved in the actual oil production and, you know, and all the fine points of oil. It seems to me that we should start something from the schools in Guyana, from the primary, secondary, tertiary levels, as well as the Caribbean level, and to make sure that we are directly and fully involved in this whole oil operation, or we'll never really be on top of it. We'll all be borrowing, or 2 or 3 people who have all the knowledge and the information. So I think that's something we should think about.
Coming from an institution like Guyana Geology and Mines Commission that has not been good at PR, I would like to say that we spend a lot of time going out and treating with the secondary school students to get them interested in science and technology. That's the term we call it now, but basically we used to call it get them interested in geology and earth sciences. We have been training with some of the resources that we've garnered through the contracts that we've had in a general sense, because we're not only looking at professionals to get into the oil sector, which is new now, but as you know, we service the mining sector, and that's one of the places where we have a paucity of professionals. And I would say that between 2006 or 5 to up till last year, I believe, every year GGMC has been sponsoring from first year to first degree, well, first degrees. We've been sponsoring approximately 10, 12, 15 students, scholarships in geology, minerals, resources, or environmental. We intend to continue with that. I am not one who would want to advocate necessarily that there is the immediate live rush to all the specialty areas. I think that the institutions that are tasked with those kinds of educational purposes, they can be given the kind of assistance they need to make our first degrees really very strong and competitive. And then it's not a far way for us then to be able to treat with those persons who do need to be specialized. Within the GGMC, some of the persons over the last 3 or 4 years, we've actually sent out to do master's level professional training and qualifications in specifics related to oil and gas, geology and petroleum engineering and such. So while we do this, I think it needs to be known that there are other governmental agencies that need to get on the bandwagon on doing that, because we, or whatever becomes the Petroleum Commission, will not be able to handle this alone.
Okay, we have time for one more question. Gentleman in the blue.
Thank you very much. First, please allow me to congratulate GOGA on hosting a wonderful get-together of folks in an educational process. I wanted to speak to the comment that a gentleman from Scantech, Sean, made with respect to training, and maybe that the institutions or the government should look to funding. And I want to speak to a couple of things. I came here about 30 years ago to work on a project, and in the agreement with the government, it said at the end of the project there must be more than 125 expats out of a staff of 1,000. When that project ended, there were only 6. The reason why that occurred, the other part of the story was in our contract, it said we had to use the GGMC to drill. and they had one drill rig. That wasn't very good. When we looked along here to do the drilling, they wanted $265 a meter, plus $500,000 to mobilize to bring a drill rig in Guyana. We bought one drill rig, took the GGMC drillers, and we drilled for an all-in cost of $30 a meter. We ended up having 10 drill rigs, and drillers from Guyana who learned to drill on those rigs have drilled on all the continents in the world. The points I want to make is that businesses make decisions driven by cost. But if you look at your cost realistically and look at your investment and your commitment to your environment, it is cost effective to invest in training and exposing folks to the technology that's available. So the idea that Lars raised of a shore-based facility or a near-shore-based facility, a near-sea facility to liaise with the shore base. Our colleague from Suriname raised, well, does this challenge your corporate social responsibility? Because if you bring a widget from North America, you stop it, not quite in Port Georgetown, then you turn it around back, there are some lost opportunities. And so from a cost standpoint, direct operating cost standpoint, that may make sense. But if it landed onshore, the ability to do something with it in terms of value added, it is what the benefits are that are going to come to the society. Mr. Jeff from Exxon has said, take the money you get from oil and don't look for jobs because it's 200 kilometers away. But take that money and invest it in Guyana to create jobs to service the industry. So cost, short term for companies, they look quick turnaround. Your facility, 3 or 4 years, it pays for itself. But that pays for itself. How are we going to develop 20-something facilities to service 500,000 or 1 million barrels a day? So companies need to be able to look not to government to support their trading activities, but look to the cost benefit to themselves that it accrue from an investment in training in skills transfer. Thank you.
I think, Hilbert, that was a very good observation and comment and feedback and experience that you have from doing it for the mining industry. And I think it's exactly what we need to do for all the companies looking to come in and work in Guyana's basin, that they need to be committing to scholarships and to other things to really kickstart and recruit Guyanese into their businesses to operate, for them, and look at it as a cost-effective investment. Because, and I think when you do the analysis, you very quickly realize that in 3 to 5 years, they're going to be making much higher margins, much higher returns on investments from that investment in investing in Guyanese.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think we will all agree that that was a very rich panel discussion. I think the entire session was very good. So can you please say thank you to Emma, Craig, Lars, Newell, and of course, Kerry.